What if I told you there's an organism that eats petroleum, breaks down diesel fuel into water and carbon dioxide, and leaves behind clean soil in 8 weeks? No chemicals, no heavy machinery, no billion-dollar cleanup contracts, no men in hazmat suits, no trucks hauling poisoned earth to another poisoned hole in the ground. Just white threads spreading silently through contaminated earth, digesting poison the way you digest bread. It grows on straw, it grows on cardboard, it grows on wood chips, coffee grounds, corn stalks, and agricultural waste you would otherwise burn or bury. It costs less than $20 to cultivate enough to treat a contaminated site the size of a parking lot. It requires no electricity, no training, no license, and no permission from the corporations that charge $300 per ton to do the same job slower. The organism is a mushroom, the common oyster mushroom, the same mushroom you see in grocery stores for $6 a pound. And it has been proven in peer-reviewed studies to reduce petroleum hydrocarbons in soil by up to 95% in 16 weeks. The global environmental remediation industry generates $113 billion annually. They use excavation, incineration, chemical injection, and pump and treat systems that cost $100 to $300 per ton of contaminated soil. A mushroom does the same work for pennies, growing on waste, requiring no electricity, producing edible food as a byproduct of cleaning poison. Then a mycologist proved it on camera. The oil industry watched. The remediation industry watched. Billion-dollar contracts hung in the balance. And the knowledge was quietly buried under paperwork, regulatory hesitation, and contracts worth more than some nations' GDP. They did not ban the mushroom. They did not need to. They simply never mentioned it. And silence, when applied to something this powerful, is the most effective weapon money can buy. Welcome back to Nature's Lost Vault. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this knowledge is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. In the spring of 1998, a mycologist named Paul Stamets stood in a maintenance yard at the Washington State of Transportation in Bellingham, Washington. The soil beneath his feet was black with diesel fuel. Decades of machinery maintenance had saturated the ground with petroleum hydrocarbons at concentrations that would make any environmental engineer reach for a remediation contract worth 6 figures. The transportation had called Battelle Marine Sciences Laboratory to oversee a test. 4 piles of contaminated soil sat side by side. One was treated with bacteria, one was treated with chemical enzymes, one was left as a control, and one was inoculated with mycelium of the oyster mushroom, Pleurotus ostreatus. Stamets had spent 20 years arguing that fungi could clean contaminated land. He had published papers. He had given lectures. He had demonstrated small-scale results in his own laboratory. Nobody in the mainstream scientific establishment took him seriously. Fungi were for pizza toppings, not environmental engineering. Mycology departments across America were being defunded and closed. The study of fungi was considered a dead-end career. The idea that mushrooms could clean industrial contamination was treated as fringe science at best, delusion at worst. The Battelle scientists were skeptical. The transportation expected nothing. But they had a contaminated site that needed attention and a mycologist willing to pay for his own spawn. The cost of letting him try was essentially zero. The cost of saying no was paperwork. So they said yes, and that decision changed everything. 6 weeks later, the scientists returned. 3 of the 4 piles looked exactly the same. Dark, dead, reeking of petroleum. The 4th pile was covered in oyster mushrooms, hundreds of them, bursting from soil that had been toxic enough to kill any plant 6 weeks earlier. The mushrooms were large, healthy, and surrounded by soil that had visibly changed color from black to brown. Laboratory analysis confirmed what the human eye already suspected. Total petroleum hydrocarbons in the mushroom-treated pile had dropped from 20,000 parts per million to less than 200 parts per million in 8 weeks, a 99% reduction. The other 3 piles showed negligible change. Read that again. 20,000 parts per million down to 200 in 8 weeks from a mushroom, not a $50 million machine, not a patented chemical formula, not a decade-long contract. A mushroom that grows on straw you can buy for $5 at any farm supply store. The bacterial treatment showed minimal improvement. The enzyme treatment showed almost none. The untouched control pile sat there unchanged, still reeking of diesel, still dead, still exactly what every environmental engineer expects contaminated soil to be. Permanent. Expensive. Somebody else's problem. But the mushroom pile had transformed into something that looked like forest floor. Dark, crumbly, alive with organisms that had no business being near a transportation maintenance yard. But the story did not end there. What happened next is what made Stamets realize the implications were larger than anyone in the room understood. Insects arrived. The mushrooms attracted flies. The flies attracted beetles. The beetles attracted birds. Seeds blew in and germinated in the cleaned soil. Within 16 weeks, the pile of poisoned soil had become a small ecosystem. Life had returned to ground that industrial contamination had rendered biologically dead for decades. Stamets stood there watching birds land on soil that had been classified as hazardous waste 2 months earlier. He later described it as watching nature perform a miracle that no engineering firm on Earth could replicate at any price. He called it the most profound moment of his career. The Battelle scientists published their findings. Environmental journals covered the story. The remediation industry took notice. They studied the data, they examined the results, they verified the methodology, and then nothing happened. Not a single major remediation contract in the United States was awarded using microremediation in the decade following that experiment. Not one. Stay with me. Because what I am about to show you explains why. Let me explain why. Because the biology of what mushrooms do to petroleum is so elegant, it makes industrial remediation look medieval. Fungi are decomposers. That is their evolutionary purpose. For 400 million years, fungi have broken down complex organic molecules into simpler components. They are the reason fallen trees do not pile up forever. They are the reason dead animals return to soil. They are the reason the world is not buried under 400 million years of accumulated organic debris. The tool they use is enzymes, specifically lignin peroxidase, manganese peroxidase, and lacus. These enzymes evolved to break apart lignin, the tough structural compound in wood that almost nothing else on Earth can decompose. Termites cannot do it alone. Bacteria struggle with it. Even fire does not fully break lignin's molecular bonds. But white rot fungi, the family that includes oyster mushrooms, shiitake, and turkey tail, crack lignin apart like it is nothing. They have been doing it for 300 million years. They are the reason wood decomposes at all. Without these fungi, every tree that ever fell would still be lying on the ground. The planet would be buried under an incomprehensible pile of dead wood. Lignin is one of the most chemically complex natural polymers in existence, and here is the critical connection that changes everything. The molecular structure of lignin is chemically similar to the molecular structure of petroleum hydrocarbons, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and many industrial pollutants. The same enzymes that break down a fallen oak tree can break down diesel fuel, crude oil, TNT, nerve agents, and dozens of industrial chemicals. The mushroom does not know the difference. It encounters a complex hydrocarbon molecule. It releases enzymes. The enzymes cleave the molecular bonds. The hydrocarbon breaks into simpler compounds. Those simpler compounds break further. Eventually, what remains is water, carbon dioxide, and basic organic matter. Clean soil. This process is called microremediation. The word was coined by Paul Stamets, and it threatens an industry that has spent 40 years building the most expensive cleanup infrastructure in human history. The numbers make the threat obvious. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates there are over 450,000 contaminated sites in the United States that require remediation. Brownfields alone number over 100,000. Superfund sites number over 300, former gas stations, industrial facilities, military bases, mining operations, chemical plants. The contamination spans every state. Traditional remediation of a single Superfund site costs between $12 million and $140 million. The process takes 7 to 12 years on average. Some sites have been under remediation for over 30 years with no end in sight. The EPA's annual Superfund budget is approximately $3.5 billion, and it is not enough. Thousands of sites sit waiting because the money runs out before the contamination does. The top 5 environmental remediation firms in the United States generated combined revenue exceeding $15 billion last year. Their business model depends on complexity. Their profit margins depend on duration. Their shareholder returns depend on contaminated sites remaining contaminated long enough to bill against. The remediation industry loves this math. 450,000 contaminated sites multiplied by millions per site equals a market that never ends. Contracts are awarded in perpetuity. Consulting firms bill by the hour for decades. Equipment manufacturers sell specialized machinery that only remediation contractors buy. Lawyers negotiate consent decrees that stretch across administrations. The complexity guarantees revenue. The length guarantees job security. The cost guarantee that most contaminated sites will never be cleaned at all. Environmental justice communities, predominantly low-income neighborhoods and communities of color, bear the heaviest burden. They live on or near the most contaminated land. They wait the longest for cleanup. They receive the least funding. And they are never told that a mushroom growing on straw could begin restoring their soil for the cost of a bag of groceries. Now consider the mushroom. Oyster mushroom spawn costs $15 to $25 per bag. A single bag inoculates enough straw or wood chips to treat several cubic yards of contaminated soil. The substrate materials, straw, cardboard, wood chips, are agricultural waste available for free or nearly free in every rural and suburban area. The mushroom grows at ambient temperature. It requires no electricity. It requires no specialized equipment. It requires no permits beyond what local environmental agencies mandate for any remediation activity. A community group in 2007 used microremediation to treat diesel-contaminated soil at a former bus depot in San Francisco. Volunteers spread spawn-inoculated straw across the contaminated area over a single weekend. Total cost was under $2,500, including spawn, straw, burlap, and soil testing. A professional remediation firm had quoted $120,000 for the same site using conventional excavation and disposal, $2,500 versus $120,000. Same site, same contamination. The mushroom was 48 times cheaper. In 2011, a similar project in New Zealand treated petroleum-contaminated soil at a former timber treatment facility. The project used Pleurotus ostreatus grown on pine wood chips, a waste product from the timber industry that covered the region. Within 12 weeks, hydrocarbon levels dropped below regulatory thresholds. The total project cost was less than $5,000 New Zealand dollars. The conventional remediation estimate had exceeded $200,000. Let that number land. 48 times cheaper. Not 10% cheaper, not twice as cheap. 48 times. And the New Zealand project was 40 times cheaper. The ratio holds everywhere the mushroom is tested. The savings are not marginal, they are civilizational. This is why the remediation industry does not promote microremediation. This is why most environmental engineers have never heard the word. This is why 450,000 contaminated sites in America sit waiting while a solution grows on cardboard for the cost of a dinner for two. The science did not stop with Stamets' 1998 experiment. It accelerated. But it accelerated in places that the American remediation industry would prefer you did not know about. In 2012, researchers at the Autonomous University of Mexico published a study demonstrating that Pleurotus ostreatus degraded 87% of benzoapyrene, one of the most carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons known to science, within 60 days. This compound causes cancer. It persists in soil for decades under normal conditions. The mushroom eliminated nearly all of it in 2 months. In 2015, a team at the University of Helsinki showed that oyster mushroom mycelium broke down trinitrotoluene, TNT, the explosive compound that contaminates military sites worldwide. The fungus converted TNT into non-toxic metabolites. Military bases that have spent millions trying to remediate explosive contamination could have used mushrooms growing on straw. In 2018, researchers at the University of Rajasthan published findings showing Pleurotus species removed 93% of crude oil hydrocarbons from contaminated soil in laboratory conditions within 90 days. The study was replicated by teams in Nigeria, where oil spills from pipeline infrastructure have devastated communities in the Niger Delta for decades. Communities too poor to afford industrial remediation. Communities where children walk barefoot on soil saturated with crude oil because there is no alternative. Communities where cancer rates have tripled in a generation and no cleanup crew has ever arrived. Communities where mushrooms grow on every fallen log in the surrounding forest, waiting for someone to carry them to the contamination and let them eat. A 2020 meta-analysis published in Environmental Science and Pollution Research compiled results across 47 studies on fungal bioremediation. The aggregate finding was extraordinary. White rot fungi, the group that includes oyster mushrooms, consistently reduced hydrocarbon contamination by 70 to 95% across varying soil types, contamination levels, and climate conditions. The success rate exceeded every other bioremediation approach tested. In 2022, researchers in Ecuador demonstrated that oyster mushrooms reduced motor oil contamination in tropical soil by 82% in just 45 days. The substrate was banana waste, an agricultural byproduct so abundant in Ecuador that farmers pay to have it hauled away. Contamination cleanup powered by garbage, in a country where communities cannot afford a single consultation with an American remediation firm. 70 to 95% reduction. From an organism that grows on straw that you can buy online for $20, that produces food while cleaning poison. That has been validated on every continent where scientists had the funding and independence to test it. Every study confirms it. Every trial validates it. And the remediation industry continues charging $100 to $300 per ton of contaminated soil for approaches that are slower, less effective, and exponentially more expensive. Consider what this means at the scale of a major oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2010 released 210 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico. 210 million gallons. Picture that. Fill an Olympic swimming pool, now fill 318 more. That is how much poison entered the ocean. The cleanup cost BP $65 billion. Workers in hazmat suits scrubbed beaches by hand with chemical dispersants that were themselves toxic. The dispersants broke oil into smaller droplets that sank to the ocean floor, poisoning deepwater ecosystems that may not recover for decades. Independent researchers estimated that the dispersants caused more long-term ecological damage than the oil itself. The cure was worse than the disease. And the cure cost $65 billion. The Exxon Valdez spill in 1989 cost $2 billion in cleanup. 35 years later, petroleum residues persist in Alaskan shoreline sediments. You can still dig into certain beaches in Prince William Sound and hit oil. Herring populations never fully recovered. The remediation was declared complete. The contamination was not. The paperwork said clean, the soil said otherwise. In both cases, micro-remediation was proposed. In both cases, it was dismissed. Not because the science was insufficient, because the contracts were already signed. Because the remediation firms were already billing. Because the infrastructure of industrial cleanup was already mobilized. Mushrooms cannot be mobilized. The mushroom is too simple. And simplicity is the enemy of an industry built on complexity. This is not a conspiracy. This is contract structure. Remediation firms bill by volume and duration. A solution that works in 8 weeks generates 8 weeks of billing. A solution that takes 12 years generates 12 years of billing. The economic incentive points directly away from efficiency. The longer the cleanup takes, the more money flows. The mushroom is too fast. The mushroom is too cheap. Mushrooms are bad for business. Now here is where I need to be honest with you, because this channel does not sell hype. It sells truth. My core mediation works. The peer-reviewed evidence is overwhelming. But it has limitations that most advocates will not discuss. Scale is a real challenge. Laboratory results using controlled conditions do not always translate directly to field conditions. Soil heterogeneity, uneven contamination distribution, competing microbial communities, temperature fluctuations, and moisture variation all affect outcomes. A contaminated industrial site is not a laboratory petri dish. Contamination type matters. Fungi excel at breaking down petroleum hydrocarbons and many organic pollutants. They are less effective against heavy metals like lead, mercury, and cadmium. Fungi can bioaccumulate heavy metals, concentrating them in the mushroom fruiting bodies, but this is bioconcentration, not destruction. The metals still exist. The mushrooms that absorb them become toxic waste themselves and must not be consumed. This distinction between organic pollutant degradation and heavy metal accumulation is critical. Most internet sources blur it. I will not. Regulatory acceptance is slow. Despite decades of peer-reviewed research, micro-remediation is not yet widely approved as a primary remediation strategy by the EPA or most state environmental agencies. Approval requires standardized protocols, quality assurance procedures, and long-term monitoring data that the conventional industry has built over decades. My core mediation research is still catching up to the bureaucratic requirements, not because the science is weak, but because the funding has never been sufficient to satisfy regulatory frameworks designed around industrial methods. This is real, this is documented, and acknowledging it makes the genuine breakthroughs more credible, not less. The mushroom works. It works within specific parameters. Understanding those parameters is the difference between success and disappointment. Here is how you can start using this knowledge today. Oyster mushroom spawn is available from dozens of online suppliers. A 5-pound bag of grain spawn costs $15 to $25 and contains enough mycelium to inoculate 25 to 50 pounds of substrate material. The substrate is the food the mushroom grows on before you introduce it to contaminated soil. Straw is the most common and cheapest substrate. A bale of straw costs $5 to $10 at any farm supply store. Combined with 1 bag of spawn, you have enough material to begin treating contaminated soil for less than the cost of a single hour of a remediation consultant's time. Pasteurize straw or cardboard by soaking in hot water at 160 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. A large stock pot or metal drum works perfectly. This kills competing organisms, mold spores, and bacteria that would fight the mushroom for territory. It gives your mycelium a clean head start in colonizing the substrate. Let the substrate cool to room temperature. Squeeze out excess water until it feels like a wrung-out sponge, damp but not dripping. Mix in spawn at a ratio of roughly 10 to 20% spawn to substrate by weight. Pack the inoculated substrate into burlap sacks, mesh bags, or directly onto the contaminated area in layers. For contaminated soil, the method is called mycofiltration, or direct inoculation. Spread a 4 to 6 inch layer of spawn-inoculated substrate directly on top of contaminated ground. Cover lightly with cardboard or burlap to retain moisture and protect from direct sun. The mycelium prefers shade and consistent humidity. Water, gently if rain is insufficient. Think of watering a garden, not flooding a field. The mycelium will grow downward into the soil, extending white threads through the contamination, releasing enzymes at every point of contact, breaking hydrocarbon bonds molecule by molecule. Within 3 to 4 weeks, you will see mycelium visibly colonizing the soil surface, white threads spreading across dark ground like a network of tiny rivers. Within 6 to 8 weeks, mushrooms will fruit. The fruiting is a visible indicator that the organism is active and healthy in digesting its substrate. Within 12 to 16 weeks, hydrocarbon levels in the soil will measurably decline. You can test before and after using soil testing kits available from agricultural extension services or commercial laboratories. A basic total petroleum hydrocarbon test costs $25 to $75 per sample. The evidence will be in the numbers. For small-scale contamination, a fuel spill in a driveway, oil-stained soil near a garage, a patch of ground contaminated by a leaking storage tank, this approach is immediate, effective, and costs less than a bag of groceries. For larger applications, the principal scale. Community groups have used micro-remediation on vacant lots, former gas stations, and industrial brownfields. The materials are straw and spawn. The labor is spreading and watering. The technology is biology, doing what it evolved to do over 400 million years. There is another application that almost nobody discusses. Mycofiltration for water contamination. The same mycelium that breaks down hydrocarbons in soil can filter contaminated water passing through it. Stamets demonstrated this in experiments where stormwater runoff from parking lots, water carrying petroleum residues, heavy metals, and bacterial contamination was passed through burlap sacks filled with mycelium-colonized wood chips. The results were staggering. Coliform bacteria counts dropped by over 10,000 times. Petroleum compounds were reduced to undetectable levels. The filtered water emerged clean enough to support salmon spawning. Stormwater runoff is the #1 source of urban water pollution in the United States. Cities spend billions on concrete infrastructure to manage it. Retention ponds, drainage systems, treatment plants. A burlap sack filled with mushroom mycelium and wood chips achieves comparable filtration for the cost of materials you can carry in one hand. The implications extend to agricultural runoff, mining wastewater, and industrial discharge. Anywhere contaminated water flows across a surface, a mycelial filter can intercept and process it. The technology is a bag of colonized wood chips placed in the path of the water. That is the entire engineering specification. Here is what connects this to everything else this channel has documented. The pattern is always the same. Nature provides a solution. The solution is cheap, accessible, and cannot be patented. An industry exists that profits from the expensive alternative. The cheap solution is ignored, defunded, or actively buried. Chickens regenerate soil. The fertilizer industry buried the knowledge. Black soldier flies produce free animal feed. The pesticide and feed industries sprayed and sold the replacement. Mycorrhizal fungi feed plants without fertilizer. The chemical industry suppressed the research. And now fungi clean contaminated land for pennies. The remediation industry bills $113 billion per year using methods that are slower and less effective. The mechanism of suppression is always identical. No corporation funds research that would eliminate its own market. Universities pursue grants from industries that need their products validated, not replaced. Regulatory frameworks are built around existing methods because existing methods have existing lobbyists. New approaches, especially free ones, have no lobbyist, no marketing department, no congressional liaison. The mushroom has no lobbyist. The mushroom has no marketing budget. The mushroom cannot buy a senator dinner or fund a campaign or sponsor a conference or endow a chair at a university department named after a remediation corporation. All it can do is eat poison and turn it into soil. All it can do is grow on waste that costs nothing. All it can do is clean the damage that 150 years of industrial contamination created. Paul Stamets proved it in 1998. He stood in a parking lot in Bellingham, Washington, and watched a mushroom do what no engineering firm on Earth could replicate. Mexican researchers confirmed it in 2012. Finnish scientists validated it in 2015. Nigerian communities deployed it in 2018. 47 peer-reviewed studies compiled in 2020 made the conclusion undeniable. The mushroom works. 450,000 contaminated sites in America sit waiting for cleanup that will never come at current prices. $113 billion flows annually into an industry that processes a fraction of the contamination it bills for. Communities living on poisoned land are told the cleanup is too expensive, that remediation takes decades, that there's nothing they can do but wait. Children play on soil saturated with hydrocarbons because no one can afford the contractor's quote. Families drink water filtered through contaminated ground because the Superfund budget ran out 3 sites ago. And the solution grows on a log in the forest behind their house. That is not an exaggeration. Oyster mushrooms grow wild across every continent except Antarctica. They colonize dead wood, fallen branches, and decaying organic matter anywhere. Moisture and moderate temperatures exist. You have probably walked past them 100 times without knowing what they can do. They have been eating complex carbon compounds since before dinosaurs walked the earth. They were breaking down hydrocarbons when the first petroleum deposits were still forming underground. They will be eating them long after the remediation industry files its last invoice. The knowledge was never hidden. It was demonstrated publicly, published openly, and validated repeatedly. It was simply never funded by the industries that would be destroyed by its adoption. No remediation firm sponsors research that makes remediation firms unnecessary. No chemical company funds studies on organisms that clean without chemicals. No consulting firm promotes solutions that eliminate the need for consultants. The mushroom does not care about invoices. It does not care about contract structures or billable hours or quarterly revenue targets. It does not negotiate cleanup timelines or lobby Congress for regulatory complexity. It does not profit from delay. It does not need your money. It does not need your permission. It does not need anything except organic matter and moisture. It just eats relentlessly, silently, without pause. It breaks molecular bonds that industrial chemistry struggles to touch. It turns poison into soil. It fruits. It spreads. It does what 400 million years of evolution designed it to do. Your contaminated ground is not a permanent problem. It is not a life sentence for the community living on it. It is not a multi-million-dollar line item on a government budget that will never be approved. It is a temporary condition waiting for the right organism. The organism exists. It costs $20. It grows on waste. And it has been waiting since before humans existed for someone to notice what it does. The remediation industry prayed you would never learn this. The chemical companies hoped this knowledge would stay in journals nobody reads. The consulting firms needed you to believe that only billion-dollar infrastructure could clean contaminated land. The mushroom does not care what they need you to believe. It never has. It just keeps growing. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom. The next vault opens soon.